just so random and unexpected that it tricks your brain into thinking it is.
Who's got the better jokes? South Park or Family Guy? And with that being said, we're here to check out a video called Was South Park Right About Family Guy? AKA South Park jokes versus Family Guy jokes. Let's do this.
This is South Park versus Family Guy, a completely unnecessary examination. Now, as much as we all have our personal preferences, let's not pretend that both of these shows are not, at least on some level, funny. Both have been running for over 20 years for a reason. They have episodes with excellent premises, iconic characters, and laugh-out-loud moments. They even have a lot in common. But the writing teams, philosophies, skills, and styles are very, very different. Let's start with the basics. What exactly is Family Guy's style of comedy writing? Unlike most other animated series, Family Guy merges linear storytelling with surrealistic comedy asides and cutaway gags. This means that Family Guy does tell a story, just like The Simpsons, American Dad, and South Park. But in the middle of its story, it may unexpectedly drift aside to have fun showing what other characters are doing, even though it's irrelevant to the plot. For example, here, the story starts with the Griffins competing in a boat race against Lois's father Carter, but then the starting gun is allegedly shot by recently paroled presidential assassin John Hinckley, and Jodie Foster randomly enters the gag to compliment his shooting skills.
Maybe I was wrong about you. Maybe I was wrong about all men.
Or here, the story involves Chris being the frontman for a rebellious rock group, and when he jumps into the crowd, falls through the floor, and unexpectedly discovers Mayor Adam West playing poker with a group of dogs. Or they may set up a cutaway, in which one of the lead characters introduces a random memory, such as, like the time I did blank.
I haven't felt this out of place since that week I lived with Superman.
You remember that time I gave you apple juice and told you it was wine?
Like that time I out-farted Michael Moore.
Or stating an unusual idea so they can then show it to the audience.
Saturday I'm giving Javier Bardem a haircut.
Oh, and if Cookie Monster calls, tell him I am not talking to him until he gets out of rehab.
Like inviting a turtle to a cocktail party.
All of this makes Family Guy fast-paced and feels more like a variety show of random jokes, not committed to a single theme or storyline. Like any form of humor, the joke derives from defying the audience's expectations. Sometimes through meta-humor, meaning they break the fourth wall and talk directly to the audience about the show they're watching.
No clip? Nope, thought we had a clip. Nope, okay.
Sometimes with surrealist asides that we couldn't possibly see coming. Sometimes through musical numbers. Sometimes through extreme inappropriate behavior, like grown-ups acting like children or children acting like grown-ups. Sometimes through breaking away from the narrative for a long, drawn-out, realistic moment, like when Peter hurts his knee. Or dragging out a scene in which all the characters nod to one another for a full minute in their Star Wars episode. In these cases, the joke stems from satirizing traditional storytelling, which often leaves out these imperfect moments, like stubbing your toe, using the toilet, or fumbling a social interaction, which we all know happen in real life all the time. And the joke is that it goes on for so long, in a format that usually demands brevity, whereas here they're defying your expectations by essentially wasting the viewer's time, but in a way that hopefully becomes increasingly funny the longer it persists, as it's breaking convention. But despite what Parker and Stone claim, Family Guy usually has at least one, sometimes two storylines per episode, with a beginning, middle, and end, such as Peter gets a maid that Quagmire falls in love with, Brian and Stewie join the army, Lois becomes a model, and so on. The chaotic variety show structure of Family Guy is a stylistic choice, as Seth MacFarlane has proved that he can create fantastic animated series that follow a linear structure, such as American Dad. In essence, Family Guy's style is limitless. There's never a reason they cannot create or insert a joke into any story at any time to earn a laugh. But by contrast, South Park's comedy writing is a mixture of social commentary, shock value, and absurdism, told in a linear structure. A typical episode of South Park is written with a clear theme in mind, and the story and jokes never deviate from that theme. For example, if the episode is about getting older or psychics, every scene ties into that theme, moving the story forward, while finding humor through the absurd possibilities of the concept. Even in the Cartoon Wars episode, rather than outright telling you what they want you to believe, it gets expressed through the story and characters. For instance, Cartman wants to help Kyle get the Family Guy joke taken off the air, as once one joke is taken down, then every other group has a right to complain and the show will sink, clearly reflecting their attitude to free speech and entertainment, that either everything is okay or nothing is. And they also make the town decide that the best way to show they don't support the joke is to physically stick their heads in the sand. All of this ties neatly into the theme of free speech, and raises the question, what makes a joke acceptable or unacceptable? While simultaneously, Parker and Stone are ironically declaring Family Guy's jokes as unworthy, as they don't meet their personal standards. So it's tackling its theme from multiple perspectives. The benefit of writing each episode with a clear theme is that it's very easy to remember which episode each joke is from, as your mind can catalogue it in context of the surrounding story. Whereas with Family Guy, most cutaways could be swapped with the cutaways from another episode, and it would make no difference whatsoever. Family Guy is harder to mentally catalogue.
I would say Family Guy, so far, is the funnier of the two, because I like their cutaway gags.
As the actual storyline is often the least compelling part of the episode, as they have so many hilarious, unexpected, or memorable side pieces that your mind can't really remember what the point of any of it was. In Parker and Stone's rulebook, good comedic storytelling demands that your jokes are compatible with the story at hand, and not just random gags.
Whenever we're bringing in new writers, we always know the gaggy writers, right? Which are the ones that no matter what you're talking about and how deep of an issue or whatever character arc or whatever it is, they're just throwing out a gag. And it's just like, yeah, and then he says this. And it's like, that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. That has nothing to do with that character. You're just throwing out a gag randomly.
This means the key fundamental difference in their comedy stylings is that Family Guy is limitless. It can and will randomly insert anything it thinks is funny to keep the audience entertained and along for the ride.
Yeah, I like
Whereas South Park views that as cheap and easy, that the real craft of writing is limiting yourself and ensuring that the jokes fit with the character arcs and theme.
I never looked at it like that. The cutaway gag is my favorite part.
But what does Seth MacFarlane say about cutaways?
It's the cutaways specifically that they really, I guess, don't think are... They don't see that as a legitimate form of comedy. It's funny, those are the hardest things to write. You know, you're coming up with a premise that has to be set up and pay off in a short amount of time. You're just starting from scratch.
Not unlike Parker and Stone, MacFarlane believes his method of writing is the hardest, as it requires coming up with a premise and payoff independent of the story in order to earn the laugh. But is that true?
I believe it's true, personally.
Let's take this cutaway gag as an example. Lois is angry that Peter encouraged Joe to have an affair, and then randomly Stewie interjects.
Well, we've all made mistakes.
And we cut to Stewie walking through a door that says not an exit, and unexpectedly, a gorilla pops out and attacks him. So is MacFarlane's claim here that this premise on its own is hard to come up with and pay off in such a short time?
I never liked this cutaway gag.
If that's the case, it's a simple enough concept. We never get to know what's behind a not an exit door, as we don't get to use it. So why don't they specify what it is rather than what it isn't? So they illustrate that by putting something random and dangerous behind the doorway. Ha ha. Or is his claim that it's funnier to cut away than just being restricted to that one scene in that one story? Because if that's the case, then Parker and Stone's criticism is that the joke is completely irrelevant, and therefore acts as nothing but a distraction from your narrative's shortcomings. For instance, if you were reading George Orwell's 1984, and every now and then when he runs out of good material, he just spliced in random highlight segments from Animal Farm, would that detract from the story? Or be considered even better writing, because now it's all good material? Or is comedy writing for TV to be considered the same as stand-up comedy, where anything goes? That some comedians tie all their jokes together, and others just do one-liners? Does one require more skill than the other? Or is the only metric that matters how many laughs you actually get? South Park's claim is that Family Guy writers could not, or just did not, write a connecting scene between Lois and Peter's conversation about cheating to Stewie walking through a not an exit door and getting attacked by a gorilla, as surely that would be much more difficult, if not impossible. So by skipping those story beats, they've essentially cheated, that the jolt of shock and limitless nature makes the joke writing easy and the joke itself meaningless, as the only necessary connection to the cutaway was the word mistake. This is what Parker and Stone mean when they say the jokes are interchangeable, that you could randomly edit them into other Family Guy episodes without feeling out of place. Let's imagine South Park did the same thing. In the episode where Stan makes friends with a Mormon family, if he returned home and told his family about them, like in the normal script, and then instead of engaging in the story, Randy first responded with, "Well, we all make mistakes," and then we just cut to that funny scene from another episode where Randy tries to act sober when he's pulled over by the cops.
What seems to be the officer problem?
Would that scene be just as funny in any context? Or does it work best within the confines of that story about Randy drinking too much? It's certainly more memorable when it's in the context of a complete story, but as an independent gag, admittedly it is still pretty funny in either format. But just how often do Family Guy do this? Having researched 20 random episodes in the first 10 seasons, including TV segments that essentially act as cutaways and not including random asides, they typically averaged 7 to 12 cutaway sketches per episode. And these cutaways can last anywhere between 5 seconds and 5 minutes, as they can have a quick smash cut gag, or do an extensive sequence, like Peter fighting the chicken for a full 5 minutes. So it's either a drive-by gag and it's gone, or a lengthy when will this ever end type of gag.
That's like one of my favorite cutaways is the mime on mime violence. When he holds him at gunpoint and then shoots him and it actually does damage in the end.
That becomes legendary just because of how long it's taking. But think about it, in a 21-minute episode, we are dedicating large portions of it to irrelevant gags. And let's be honest, some cutaways seem to be inserted just to waste the audience's time, like my personal pet peeve, the Conway Twitty cutaways, in which they insert a segment of the country singer performing for what feels like an eternity. They do this in more than 5 episodes, and I've yet to meet a single human being that actually finds it funny. In the most indefensible segment, they play a full song of his for 2 minutes and 45 seconds, and the audience is just meant to endure this and somehow appreciate it as comedic genius. A quick cutaway gag that doesn't land is no big deal, as it's an immediate hit or miss and we move on. But when this joke doesn't land, it keeps not landing for almost 3 full minutes. Surely this is a prime example of what Parker and Stone mean when they say the writers need to work harder.
What makes me disappointed about Family Guy is I think it could be an amazing show. I think they're really, you can tell they're smart people working on it.
I don't think they work hard enough.
Yeah, they need to work harder.
As the audience tuned in to watch Family Guy, not just Conway Twitty performing for over 12% of the episode. Now from what I can tell, my angry reaction is the joke, that you don't want it, but you're being forced to watch it. In which case, fine. But then McFarlane can't justify this with his earlier claim that these are actually harder jokes to write, as they require a complete setup and payoff of their own. Which leads to the next question. Are the cutaway sketches actually even funny? Or is it just so random and unexpected that it tricks your brain into thinking it is? Like this pointless cutaway in which Peter pitches Crystal Pepsi.
You won't be able to see him past your Pepsi. And then who's dead, huh? You're dead. Stabbed. Crystal Pepsi.
Stabbed.
Yeah, that's funny, right? Because it's inappropriate to say that at a pitch meeting. But why interrupt the episode for this? Why Crystal Pepsi? Why any of it?
Because they love us. That's why.
Let's use this cutaway as an example. The setup is that Brian being hit must hurt worse than receiving a birthday telegram from Zinedine Zidane. The pop culture reference is that Zidane famously headbutted a fellow footballer in the World Cup. And the joke is imagining he did that as a birthday telegram.
That's funny.
But how would... okay.
That's funny.
But in that moment, your brain connects the tiny bit of information you know about him, and the surprise of it happening at all.
And it's funny.
And then we're just on to the next scene, like it didn't even happen.
Yeah.
South Park famously portrayed the Family Guy writing staff as a group of manatees randomly selecting a series of idea balls. Each ball contains a verb, noun, or pop culture reference and combine to make a cutaway gag. So for this cutaway, the balls would be hurt, old lady, birthday gift, and Zinedine Zidane. None of these words or ideas intrinsically belong in a sentence.
How do we make a gag out of Justin Bieber giving mouth to South to Odell Beckham using these same 4 balls? It's not weird because there's 4 of them. The more you know.
Together, which is why the joke is funny. Or for this cutaway, farts, Michael Moore, competition, and music. But not all cutaways are irrelevant to the story. Sometimes they're thematically tied together, or at least relevant to the new setting the characters inhabit. And despite being random, it doesn't mean that these cutaway gags are never funny, as some of these segments are undeniably Family Guy at its best.
That's funny.
But as much as we can focus on the differences between Family Guy and South Park, it cannot be denied that there are similarities.
I am nothing like Family Guy.
Both shows involve toilet humor, social commentary, musical numbers, and even some of the same gags, just told differently, or for different periods of time. In 2004, South Park created a joke that the detective doesn't arrest a serial killer with chopped off hands on his wall, as they're looking for left hands, and these appear to be right hands, as they're turned over with the thumb facing the other way. So rather than arresting the guy with chopped off hands on his wall, he leaves, as he's not the guy. But he is suspicious. So for a full minute, there's a montage of him researching in a lab, and even getting distracted along the way, until he realizes what the audience already knew all along. This is actually quite a Family Guy style joke, where they drag out the gag for as long as possible. But the context of the story raises the stakes so it's even funnier, as the detective is in a position of authority, and Cartman's life depends on him. So the joke lands harder because it's not just wasting our time, it's wasting Cartman's precious time. Compare that to a similar joke Family Guy made in 2000. Peter is hoping to find one of 4 remaining tickets to the brewery tour. Now that one is gone, he has to figure out how many are left. So they do a quick 10-second montage of him at a lab, performing random tasks, and then when he returns from his research,
this many!
He doesn't even have the number, just holds up his hand with 3 fingers.
That's funny.
The joke is quicker and defies our expectations at the end, as Peter still doesn't know the number 3 and can only hold up his fingers, making all his research pointless as he was initially counting on his fingers anyway. But which joke is funnier? South Park's is dragged out for longer, but is part of the story and has higher stakes. Or Family Guy's quick 10-second gag, with a punchline achieving all the same greatness with no major stakes. There is no right and wrong, they're both just silly gags, but it's about how much you value its relevance to the storyline.
If this were the laugh event in the Hood Olympics, right now Family Guy would be in a very, very comfortable lead.
But similarities go beyond just individual gags. Let's compare how each show tells essentially the same story, with virtually identical conclusions.
Really?
South Park's Bloody Mary and Family Guy's Friends of Peter G. Both episodes involve a character getting arrested for being drunk, going to Alcoholics Anonymous, and at the end, concluding that moderation is key. In South Park, there's a total of 15 scenes. The boys learn about the concept of discipline in their karate class. Then Randy arrives drunk to drive the boys home, displaying he has no discipline, and gets arrested. In school, Randy brings shame to Stan by talking to the class about his drunk driving. In his AA meeting, Randy doesn't believe he's an alcoholic, but is told he's powerless and has a disease. Therefore, when Stan comes home, Randy is on the couch hopelessly drinking, playing the victim. They then introduce a bleeding statue of the Virgin Mary being discovered by a priest, which Randy sees on the news. Stan goes to the AA meeting to say you messed with my dad by saying he has a disease, he just needs discipline, which as you can see, ties back to scene 1. The story progresses as a Vatican member comes to see the statue of Mary and calls it a miracle. So needing a miracle of his own, Randy now must see the statue and wants to drunk drive there. Stan stops him and is made drive instead. Randy sees a line of people wanting to be cured of serious diseases like cancer and elephantitis. He skips the queue as he now equates his alcoholism with their issues. The statue bleeds on his face, so Randy believes he's cured by a miracle, therefore he now acts deeply religious. Then when he has pizza with his AA group, a TV reports that the Pope says it's actually not a miracle. So Randy loses faith and starts drinking again, as he believes he's powerless, linking back to his first AA meeting. But Stan stops him outside and says if it wasn't a miracle, then it proves that he did successfully quit drinking by himself, This teaches him that moderation requires discipline, again linking back to scene 1 at karate class, and we're done. So as you can see, each scene leads directly into the next and always progresses the story forward. The very first scene informs us of the lesson of the episode, and by having Randy believe anything he's told by authority figures, it allows Parker and Stone to provide real social commentary on the issue of drinking. The jokes are all based on Randy being a drunken fool, or playing the victim, or commenting on AA's explicit ties to organized religion. Now let's see how Family Guy dealt with the exact same theme and lesson. They did it in 17 scenes. Peter and Brian go to the cinema, and we get a funny aside about how studio logo intros are hard to decipher from the movie actually starting. They decide to get drunk and there's commotion, and they end up arrested by Joe. They go to court and are sentenced to 30 days of AA. Over breakfast, Brian expresses that AA is stupid, a random cutaway gag of an old poet writing the rap lyrics to Kanye West's Gold Digger. At their first AA meeting, Peter listens to other people's stories and then tells his own, which is a cutaway of him drunk driving through a waterslide. Back to the AA meeting, there's talk of a higher power, which causes Brian to push back because he's an atheist, which earns another cutaway, showing how everyone was peaceful before religion came along. Then Lois asks about how it went. Brian and Peter complain about AA and think really what everyone needs is a place to drink shamelessly. So they bring booze to the next AA meeting and everyone gets drunk. Joe goes to the AA meeting due to a noise complaint, which ties Joe back in from the opening scene. They quickly convert the room to looking like a sermon for AA. Peter sings the upbeat song Mr. Booze for several minutes. After that, everyone is drunk outside, and Peter decides to drive home and crashes his car. Death comes and shows him where his life is headed if he keeps drinking, starting with him lining up his family to burn with a cigar, then sleeping with his unattractive boss Angela, then showing what it would be like if Peter never drank at all. Instead, he's lining up his family to hug them instead of burning them. But he no longer has Quagmire and Joe as friends, so he hates both outcomes and learns to drink in moderation. It ends with a cutaway gag of two seagulls at the dump drinking his thrown away beers. There are several differences between both storytelling styles, even though they both ultimately conclude the same message. Firstly, South Park has no cutaways or asides, so we can cut out 5 of Family Guy's segments right off the bat, meaning less time is dedicated to the actual story. The next is that South Park introduces its core message from the very opening scene with the boys at karate class, whereas Family Guy has no message until it's shoehorned in at the end when Peter, like Ebenezer Scrooge, is shown what his life could be like if he doesn't stop drinking so much. They also don't give Brian any revelation or conclusion at all, even though he was attending AA too. Thirdly, tone-wise, Family Guy takes its theme much less seriously.
I feel like they're both awesome shows, you know what I'm saying? Like, I watch them both.
Instead, it has a 3.5-minute song, Mr. Booze, that's very upbeat and playful for a song about quitting drinking. Whereas South Park delves into the psychology of AA's messaging and how it could be teaching its members a form of learned helplessness. But what this exercise does expose is that Parker and Stone's claim that Family Guy jokes are never relevant to the story is false, as whether it's a song or a cutaway, most of the episode is spent on the same theme. Really, Family Guy is spinning 2 plates at the same time, jokes that work within their story, and then when they don't have something good enough, divert to jokes outside their story. However, it's hard not to see Parker and Stone's point, that when some episodes have 12 cutaway gags, that it meaningfully detracts from the story. But does that therefore make it bad storytelling? Well, part of great writing is ensuring that everything works in tandem. When you read a great story, you don't necessarily realize it right away, but on closer inspection, usually the theme was subtly present on each page, so that the story makes sense to you on an emotional level without needing to be spelled out to you yet on an intellectual level. You feel something about the characters and the theme, and the story then may present to you something that either confirms that message or contrasts it, to make you feel like the outcome was even more of an injustice. In great comedy writing, typically it's that the premise alone is funny enough to create numerous comedic opportunities, and the characters are all so unique that you can select the right ones for each story to maximize its potential. So let's look at storytelling done right when there's more than one storyline. In TV writing, these are typically an A story and a B story. In South Park's You're Getting Old, The theme of the episode is about time changing your taste. We start with Stan turning 10 years old and receiving a tweenwave album. His mother doesn't want him listening to that shitty music, whereas Randy used to want to be a rock star, so pretends to understand its merits. The story then diverges, with Randy trying to act younger than he is by liking modern music, while Stan can't help that he's suddenly hating all the stuff that he used to love. But Randy's refusal to let go of his dream highlights that actually he and Sharon have lost interest in one another over time and grown apart. And now Stan, who has already been losing friends, has to watch his family break apart as they're changing too, all triggered from that album he got as a gift in the opening scene. Stan is the A story, Randy is the B story, they both meet at the beginning, separate, and then merge at the end. Or in the case of Miss Teacher Bangs a Boy, the A story is that Ike begins a romantic relationship with his teacher, and the B story is that Cartman becomes the hall monitor at school. And when Kyle catches Ike and lets it slip to Cartman that they've been making out in the hallways, the stories merge, and now Cartman makes it his mission to stop them. Not because what she's doing is morally wrong, but because it's against the school rules that he's enforcing. And the school rules and people's differing attitudes to them are the theme of both storylines, so it's all neatly tied together.
Nice.
This isn't unique to South Park. Family Guy can do this too. In Season 3's Brian Wallows and Peter Swallows, the A story is that Brian falls into depression from loneliness and winds up caring for a cranky elderly woman who he falls in love with, while the B story involves Peter growing a beard that attracts swallows to use as a nest. He can't get rid of them at first, but then falls in love with them and won't let them leave. And then thematically, the two stories mirror one another at the end, as Brian has to learn to let go of Pearl as she passes away from old age, and Peter has to learn to let go and release the birds back into the wild, which is beautiful thematic continuity.
That's pretty.
But is that really how most Family Guy episodes are written? For the first 3 seasons, often yes, although most episodes only have one story per episode, but after that, rarely.
Yeah, that food looked
For
good.
example, in Season 4, Lois becomes a model, while Brian gets worms and has to work for Stewie.
Oh.
There is no connection between these two storylines. They start separate, end separate, and that's it. Or in Season 5, Brian and Stewie join the army, while Chris joins a rock band. These stories have nothing linking them together. No theme, no plot, no nothing. But what is interesting is how Family Guy's writing has evolved over the last 15 years. I researched 3 episodes in Season 20, and to my surprise, there were very few cutaway jokes at all. I counted just 2, 4, and 3, so they've cut the number of cutaway jokes in half. So does this mean that the storytelling is better? Emotionally, perhaps, but entertainment-wise, not really. There is more time dedicated to the emotional experience of each character, but if anything, the show feels flatter than before. The characters are often just sitting around talking to one another instead of being more active or doing something funny. And although every episode has an A and B story, none of them are connected whatsoever. This could just be the result of being on air for over 20 years, but depending on your personal preference, you could say that this is evidence that Parker and Stone were wrong, that the show is much funnier with random cutaway gags.
It is, yeah.
Or you could claim it's evidence that they were totally right, that once you strip away the shiny glitter of random cutaways, that the writers have little to offer comedically. So in conclusion, were Trey Parker and Matt Stone's claims that Family Guy is poorly written accurate? Well, on the front of the cutaway jokes being interchangeable, the answer is yes, they usually are. And are the cutaway jokes just random combinations of words that could be created by manatees selecting balls? Sometimes yes, but that doesn't mean that the jokes themselves are never funny. And are Family Guy's jokes never relevant to the story? No, they often are. They're just blended with irrelevant jokes, which makes the story itself less memorable. And finally, does Family Guy tell a story with a beginning, middle, and end? Yes, but sometimes that story feels secondary to the gags, and therefore the character development feels unearned. Ironically, in South Park's Cartoon Wars, they depicted Family Guy as the show that would get into trouble for showing the Prophet Muhammad. But in 2010, it was actually Parker and Stone who found themselves in trouble over the exact same issue in their 200th episode. and Seth MacFarlane got to commentate on the sidelines, revealing his personal feelings on whether or not jokes can go too far.
There's no way to know. If it were me and I was in this situation, it was like, well, is this worth getting shot? Right. Is it the funniest joke anyone's ever written?
But
okay,
did they know
Fox,
that
if you want to censor this.
Which again speaks to the difference in both writing philosophies. Trey Parker and Matt Stone are more principled, that either everything is okay or nothing is okay, but that there are rules to storytelling that need to be obeyed to ensure you're telling a worthwhile story.
Yeah.
This is a more puritanical view, that storytelling has a higher purpose and responsibility. Whereas Seth MacFarlane is more pragmatic. Whatever works to keep the audience entertained is fair game, and if some jokes are going to cause real-world trouble, then who cares? Cut them. After all, they're just jokes.
Yeah.
But perhaps he only feels that way, as his jokes are more interchangeable and less intentioned. So after all of this, what do you think? Is it really worse comedy writing to include funny jokes that aren't relevant to the story? Or is it better comedy writing to complete a linear story with thematic continuity, but fewer funny jokes? The easy answer that most people will give is both. But the real question is, what's more important? And ultimately, in the battle between South Park and Family Guy, who do you think is better?
Yeah, it's hard to choose, honestly, you know what I'm saying? Because I watch a lot of South Park, watch a whole lot of Family Guy. I say watch both equally. Yo, hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to comment, like, and subscribe. It's your boy BlastphamousHD. Twism.